Growing up in a household where favoritism was as thick as the air we breathed, I often felt like an outsider in my own family. My name is Alex, and at 23, I'm juggling a full-ride scholarship to part-time jobs and the crushing weight of expectations that never seem to lighten. On paper, my life might look impressive: straight A's, glowing recommendations from professors, and a work ethic that would make anyone proud. But behind closed doors, none of it mattered. Not to my parents, anyway. They had their golden child, Cara, my 25-year-old sister, who could do no wrong even when she did everything wrong. Cara wasn't just favored, she was worshipped. If she brought home a C on her report card, my parents threw a party as if she'd cured cancer. Meanwhile, if I dared bring home anything less than perfection, it was treated like a betrayal of epic proportions. "You're smarter than this, Alex," they'd say, shaking their heads in disappointment, as though my existence was solely to uphold some unattainable standard. And while I slaved away at school and work, Cara floated through life with zero accountability. Chores, not her thing. Responsibilities, someone else's problem. She lived like a queen without lifting a finger, while I carried the weight of the world and then some. What made it worse was how effortlessly she manipulated everyone around her, especially our parents. Her charm was toxic, her excuses endless, and her sense of entitlement boundless. She worked sporadic retail jobs that barely lasted longer than a season, yet somehow convinced mom and dad that she was figuring herself out. Meanwhile, I was busting my ass to build a future for myself, only to be told I should be more like Cara because she had it harder. The woman whose biggest hardship seemed to be deciding which overpriced latte to order. It was infuriating. But the cracks in Cara's facade were beginning to show, even if no one else wanted to see them. Beneath her polished Instagram posts and carefree attitude lay a web of lies and reckless decisions that threatened to unravel not just her life but mine too. Little did I know, the storm brewing within our family would soon force me to choose between loyalty and self-preservation. Growing up in a household where favoritism was as palpable as the air we breathed, I often felt like an outsider in my own family. My name is Alex, and at 23, I've spent years navigating the labyrinth of expectations, sacrifices, and unspoken rules that governed our home. The most suffocating part: watching my parents bend over backward to shield Cara, my older sister, from accountability while simultaneously placing impossible standards on me. It wasn't just about who got more love, it was about how much they were willing to overlook for her, versus how little room there was for error when it came to me. Cara's mistakes weren't merely forgiven, they were celebrated. When she brought home a C on her report card during high school, my parents threw her a congratulations party because, apparently, she'd tried her best. Meanwhile, if I so much as slipped from an A to a B, it felt like the world was ending, at least in their eyes. One particular incident stands out vividly in my memory, not only because of its absurdity but also because of the deep wound it left behind. It happened during my sophomore year of college, right after midterm exams. I had worked tirelessly to balance two jobs, a full course load, and extracurricular activities. Despite all that, I ended up with one B, a rare misstep in an otherwise flawless academic record. For anyone else, this would have been seen as human. For me, it was catastrophic. When I showed them my grades, the silence was deafening. My mom stared at the paper, her lips pursed tightly, while my dad shook his head with disappointment etched across his face. "Alex," he began, his voice heavy with disapproval, "you're smarter than this. What happened?" The words stung not because they were harsh, but because they carried no acknowledgement of everything else I had achieved. Instead of celebrating Maya's or recognizing the sheer effort I poured into every aspect of my life, they zeroed in on the single flaw. And then, almost predictably, Cara walked into the room holding her report card. She beamed proudly as she announced, "I got a C+." To my astonishment, my parents lit up like fireworks on the 4th of July. "Wow, Cara. That's amazing. Look how hard you've worked." They hugged her, praising her effort and resilience, completely oblivious to the irony of their double standards. The contrast between their reactions hit me like a freight train. Here I was, busting my ass day and night, sacrificing sleep, social life, and sanity to excel, yet I couldn't even earn a fraction of the praise Cara received for doing the bare minimum. Worse still, I could see the pride in their eyes when they looked at her. It was unconditional, unwavering, and utterly undeserved. In that moment, something inside me cracked. I started questioning whether anything I did truly mattered to them. Was I invisible? Did they even notice the toll their constant pressure took on me? That evening, unable to shake off the weight of their words, I retreated to my room. Sitting alone in the dim light, I replayed the scene over and over in my mind. Every insult disguised as constructive criticism, every comparison made between me and Cara, it all came rushing back. I thought about the countless times I'd been told I needed to try harder or be more responsible, despite already giving everything I had. Meanwhile, Cara floated through life untouched by consequences, her failures spun into victories, her mediocrity elevated to greatness. The injustice of it burned within me, fueling a mix of anger, sadness, and self-doubt. What hurt the most wasn't just the lack of recognition, it was the realization that no matter what I accomplished, it would never be enough. My achievements didn't define me in their eyes. Instead, I was perpetually measured against Cara, the golden child whose very existence seemed designed to overshadow mine. Even worse, I began to internalize their criticism. Maybe I wasn't good enough, maybe I didn't deserve their approval. These thoughts gnawed at me, planting seeds of insecurity that grew roots deep within my psyche. As days turned into weeks, the tension simmered beneath the surface. I tried to bury myself in work and school, hoping to drown out the noise of their favoritism. But the resentment lingered, festering like an untreated wound. Each time Cara breezed past responsibility, whether it was skipping chores, blowing money on frivolous purchases, or relying on others to clean up her messes, I felt the imbalance grow sharper. Yet, whenever I dared point it out, I was met with dismissive remarks. "You don't understand," they'd say. "Cara's trying her best, trying her best." She barely lifted a finger, yet somehow managed to command loyalty and adoration without question. This toxic dynamic reached a boiling point one night during dinner. Cara casually mentioned she'd forgotten to pay her phone bill again, shrugging it off as though it were no big deal. My parents immediately offered to cover it, brushing aside her responsibility with excuses like, "She's been busy," or "everyone makes mistakes," when I chimed in, pointing out how unfair it was that I had to juggle two jobs to support myself while they bailed her out repeatedly. The table erupted into chaos. My mom accused me of being selfish, while my dad lectured me about family values. Their hypocrisy was staggering. How could they preach unity and sacrifice when they refused to hold Cara accountable for her actions? By the end of the argument, I was exhausted not just physically, but emotionally. I realized then that nothing would change unless I changed. The scales were tipped too far in Cara's favor, and no amount of pleading or reasoning would make them see the truth. So, I resolved to focus on surviving to protect myself from the emotional toll of their favoritism and find strength in my own accomplishments, regardless of whether they acknowledged them. Little did I know, this decision would set the stage for even greater battles ahead. The cracks in Cara's carefully constructed facade began to show not long after her breakup with Greg. At least, that's what she wanted everyone to believe. According to her, life had become unbearably difficult without him. Her rent was astronomical, her job paid peanuts, and she was barely scraping by. But anyone who took a closer look could see the truth. Cara wasn't struggling, she was indulging. Her Instagram feed told a different story altogether. Brunch at overpriced cafes, spa days, designer handbags, none of it screamed financial hardship. Yet, somehow my parents swallowed her sob story hook, line, and sinker. It started subtly, as these things often do. My mom would drop casual comments during dinner, like, "Cara's having such a hard time lately," or "rent is just so expensive these days." At first, I nodded along, assuming it wasn't my problem. After all, Cara was an adult now, shouldn't she figure it out herself? But then came the inevitable conversation that made my blood run cold. One evening, my parents called me into the dining room, their faces set in expressions of grave seriousness. I knew immediately this wasn't going to be good. Alex, we've been talking, my dad began, his tone heavy with implication. Oh, I braced myself for whatever was coming next. My mom jumped in, her voice dripping with sweetness but laced with manipulation. You're doing so well in school, Alex. You've got that scholarship. To jobs, you're really setting yourself up for success. I forced a tight smile, sensing where this was headed. Thanks, I said cautiously, already feeling the weight of dread settle in my chest. Well, my mom continued, Cara is struggling right now. Her rent is really high, and her job just doesn't pay enough to cover everything. She paused, letting the words hang in the air like a guillotine waiting to fall. My dad picked up where she left off. We were thinking. Since you're saving so much with your scholarship and living here rent-free, maybe you could help her out, just for a few months, until she gets back on her feet. I stared at them, stunned. You want me to pay Cara's rent? I asked, my voice rising despite my attempt to stay calm. My mom gave me a look that bordered on pity. She's your sister, she said, as if that single sentence justified everything. She's an adult, I shot back. Shouldn't she figure it out herself? She's trying, Alex, my dad interjected, his tone sharpening. Not everyone has the same opportunities you've had. You're in a position to help, and it's only fair, I repeated incredulously. How is it fair that I'm working 2 jobs, going to school full-time, and now I have to bail out Cara too? This isn't about fairness, it's about enabling her bad decisions. My mom shook her head, her lips pursed in disapproval. You're being selfish, Alex, she said, her voice cutting through me like a knife. If the situation were reversed, Cara would help you. I seriously doubted that. We argued for what felt like hours. I told them I was already stretched thin, that I couldn't afford to take on another responsibility. I explained that helping Cara wouldn't solve anything, it would only perpetuate her cycle of dependency. But my parents refused to listen. She's your family, my mom snapped, her patience wearing thin. Would you let her drown while you swim? When logic failed, they resorted to guilt. We've supported you your whole life, Alex, my dad said, his voice low and accusatory. Your education, your upbringing, we've given you everything. And now, when we ask for one small thing in return, you refuse. And what about the times I've helped before? My mom added, her eyes narrowing. Remember when you needed money for textbooks last semester? Or when your car broke down and we paid for repairs? Don't you think it's time you repaid us? Their words hit me like a punch to the gut. They weren't just asking for help, they were weaponizing my past dependence on them. The implicit threat hung in the air. If I didn't comply, they would cut me off completely. No more tuition support, no more safety net. Just me alone, trying to navigate the chaos of college and work without their backing. In the end, I caved, not because I believed they were right, but because I didn't have a choice. As much as it pained me to admit, I still relied on them in ways I hated to acknowledge. So, begrudgingly, I agreed to send Cara part of my paycheck each month. But deep down, I knew this decision would come back to haunt me. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the principle. Every dollar I sent felt like another nail in the coffin of my self-respect, another reminder that no matter how hard I worked, my efforts would never be enough in their eyes. The cracks in Cara's carefully constructed web of lies began to widen when I stumbled upon something that shattered my already fragile trust in her. It started innocently enough, or so I thought. One evening, while scrolling through Venmo out of sheer curiosity or perhaps suspicion, I discovered a series of payments from Cara's account to Greg. The captions were vague: for groceries, you owe me one, thanks again, but the amounts matched perfectly with the money I had been sending her each month for rent. My stomach churned as realization dawned on me. She wasn't using my hard-earned cash to pay her bills. Instead, she was funneling it straight into Greg's pockets. At first, I tried to rationalize what I saw. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe these payments weren't what they seemed, but deep down, I knew better. Every dollar I sent her was supposed to ease her financial burden, not fund whatever toxic dynamic still existed between her and Greg. Yet here we were, and the betrayal stung worse than anything else she'd done before. Still, I resolved to confront her calmly, hoping against hope that this could all be some terrible misunderstanding. But fate had other plans. A few nights later, just as I was settling into bed after another grueling day of work and school, a loud pounding echoed through the house. Startled, I grabbed my phone and crept toward the door, heart racing. When I opened it, Greg stood there, disheveled and reeking of alcohol. His bloodshot eyes locked onto mine with a mixture of anger and desperation. Without waiting for an invitation, he pushed past me, stumbling into the living room like he owned the place. "What do you want?" I demanded, slamming the door shut behind him. My voice trembled despite my attempt to sound firm. Greg ignored me, collapsing onto the couch with a dramatic sigh. He tilted his head back, staring at the ceiling as if summoning the strength to speak. Finally, he muttered, "Cara isn't answering her damn phone." I crossed my arms, glaring at him. "Why are you here?" He smirked, leaning forward slightly. "Oh, come on, Alex. Don't play dumb. You know exactly why I'm here." Then, almost gleefully, he added, "She didn't tell you, did she?" "Tell me what?" I snapped, though my pulse quickened with dread. Greg's grin widened, revealing teeth stained yellow from neglect. "Your precious sister has a kid. My kid, 2 years old. And guess who's been footing the bill while she keeps me quiet about it? That's right, you." The words hit me like a freight train. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, trying to process what he was saying. Cara, a mother. All this time, she'd hidden such a monumental secret not just from me, but from our entire family. Worse still, she'd used my money to maintain her charade, ensuring Greg stayed silent about their child. "You're lying," I managed to say, though my voice lacked conviction. Greg barked out a laugh, clearly enjoying my shock. "Yeah, that's what she wants you to think. But nope, man, it's the truth. She's been paying me off to keep things under wraps. Doesn't want mommy and daddy finding out their golden child isn't as perfect as they believe." Each word felt like a dagger twisting deeper into my chest. I clenched my fists, fury bubbling beneath the surface. How could she do this? How could she manipulate me so thoroughly, knowing full well how much I sacrificed to help her? "Get out," I growled, stepping closer. "Ow." Greg raised his hands in mock surrender, smirking as he stood up. Fine, I'm leaving, but you tell Cara this isn't over. She doesn't get to rewrite history." As soon as he stumbled out into the night, I sank onto the couch, my mind spinning. The pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place. Her evasiveness whenever I asked about her finances, her cryptic Instagram posts, her constant excuses. None of it had been coincidence. She'd built an entire life based on deceit, using everyone around her including me as pawns in her game. By morning, the anger had solidified into resolve. This wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about accountability. Cara had spent years coasting through life, leaving chaos in her wake while others cleaned up her messes, but not this time. This time, I would make sure she faced the consequences of her actions, no matter how painful it might be for both of us. The confrontation with Cara was inevitable, but nothing could have prepared me for the storm that followed. Armed with evidence Venmo transactions, screenshots of her frivolous spending, and Greg's drunken confession, I marched into her apartment, my cousin Matt trailing behind me as backup. My heart pounded like a drum in my chest, each beat amplifying the anger simmering beneath the surface. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about accountability, about exposing the web of lies she'd spun around all of us. "Carol," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside me, "we need to talk." She looked up from her phone, startled, her eyes darting between me and Matt. For a brief moment, there was a flicker of guilt or maybe fear, but it vanished almost instantly, replaced by her usual air of indifference. "What do you guys want?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe as if this were some casual visit. I didn't waste time. "You've been lying to everyone," I said, my tone sharp enough to cut glass. "The money I've been sending you for rent. It's not going toward your bills. It's going straight to Greg." Her face paled, but only for a second, then came the deflection. "Oh, Alex, don't be so dramatic," she scoffed, rolling her eyes. You're always overreacting. Overreacting, I shot back, my voice rising. You've been using my hard-earned cash to fund Greg's lifestyle while pretending you're struggling to pay your rent. And let's not forget the kid, the 2-year-old you've kept hidden from everyone, including Mom and Dad. Matt stepped forward, his arms crossed. Don't try to weasel out of this, Cara. Just answer the question. For a moment, she was silent, her jaw tightening as she processed the situation. Then, predictably, she turned the tables. You think you're so perfect, Alex, she spat, her voice dripping with venom. Always judging me, always acting like you're better than everyone else. But guess what? You're clueless. You have no idea what I'm dealing with. No idea? I repeated incredulously. I know exactly what you're dealing with. You're selfish, manipulative, and incapable of taking responsibility for your actions. Every dollar I gave you was supposed to help you get back on your feet, not keep Greg quiet about your secret child. She flinched at the word child, but quickly recovered, her expression hardening. And whose fault is that? If you hadn't been snooping through my Venmo, none of this would have happened. You're obsessed with controlling everything, Alex. Maybe if you focused on your own life instead of mine, things wouldn't be such a mess. Her words hit like a slap, but they only fueled my resolve. This isn't about control, it's about honesty. You lied to me, to Mom and Dad, to everyone. And now you're trying to blame me for your mistakes. That's rich, Cara. The argument escalated quickly, voices bouncing off the walls of her tiny apartment. By the time we left, I was seething, my hands clenched into fists. The next morning, I called her landlord, laying out everything I knew. The woman on the other end listened intently, her frustration evident. Thank you for letting me know, she said, her tone clipped. We'll handle this immediately. True to her word, the eviction notice arrived within days. When Cara found it sitting on the counter at our parents' house, her reaction was explosive. She stormed through the house like a hurricane, slamming doors and screaming obscenities. This is all your fault, she shrieked, pointing an accusatory finger at me. If you hadn't stuck your nose where it doesn't belong, none of this would have happened. I stared at her, incredulous. My fault. You're the one who lied, who manipulated everyone, who ignored your responsibilities. Stop blaming others for your own failures, but of course, she didn't listen. Instead, she turned to our parents, sobbing hysterically. How can you let him treat me like this? He hates me. He's always hated me. My mom rushed to comfort her, murmuring soothing words while shooting daggers at me with her eyes. My dad stood silently, his expression unreadable but clearly siding with Cara. Watching them rally around her felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. They weren't just enabling her, they were excusing her behavior, absolving her of any wrongdoing. Meanwhile, I was the villain, the ungrateful son who dared to challenge their golden child. The injustice of it burned hotter than ever. When Cara moved back home, the tension reached a boiling point. She acted as though she were doing everyone a favor by gracing us with her presence, never once acknowledging the chaos she'd caused. My parents, predictably, bent over backward to accommodate her, cleaning out her old room and stocking the fridge with her favorite snacks. Meanwhile, I packed my bags, ready to leave for good. As I walked out the door, Cara sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had changed. My parents hovered nearby, discussing plans to help her find a new apartment. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't look back. For the first time in years, I felt free. The night I left, the air was heavy with unspoken tension. After weeks of simmering anger and frustration, I finally reached my breaking point. Cara had moved back in with our parents, acting as if she were doing them a favor by gracing their home with her presence. Meanwhile, my parents scrambled to clean up yet another mess she'd created, bending over backward to make sure she felt comfortable. It was nauseating to watch. Every conversation revolved around her, how stressed she was, how unfair life had been to her, how everyone needed to rally around her. But no one dared mention the lies, the manipulation, or the fact that she'd burned every bridge while expecting others to rebuild them for her. I couldn't stay any longer. The house felt suffocating, like walls closing in on me. My room, once a sanctuary, now felt alien, a reminder of everything I'd endured but could no longer tolerate. That evening, after another exhausting day of work and school, I packed a duffel bag with only the essentials: clothes, my laptop, some books, and a few sentimental items I couldn't bear to leave behind. I didn't say goodbye. There was no point. They wouldn't understand anyway. Instead, I slipped out quietly, leaving behind the chaos that had consumed my life for far too long. At first, they didn't notice. By the time they realized I was gone, it was morning. My phone buzzed incessantly throughout the drive, a barrage of calls and texts from both my mom and dad. "Where are you? Why did you leave without saying anything? This isn't fair, Alex." Their messages grew increasingly desperate, pleading with me to come back, but I ignored them. Each notification felt like a weight pressing down on me, a reminder of the emotional toll I'd carried for years. For the first time, I allowed myself to breathe, to imagine a life free from their toxic dynamics. A week passed before my mom finally called me directly. Her voice trembled when she spoke, thick with emotion. "Alex, please, we need you here. Cara's struggling so much, and she needs her brother. You can't just abandon us like this." "Abandon you?" I shot back, incredulous. "Mom, Cara's been lying to all of us for years. She used me, manipulated me, and you let her get away with it. How am I supposed to trust any of you?" "She's your sister," Mom pleaded, her tone shifting to guilt-tripping mode. "Family sticks together, Alex. We're all she has." "And whose fault is that?" I countered sharply. "You've spent years enabling her behavior, covering for her mistakes, and excusing her responsibility. She doesn't take responsibility because she knows you'll always bail her out." There was silence on the other end, broken only by the sound of her shaky breathing. Then, softly, almost desperately, she said, "Please, Alex. Forgive her. She's trying. She's really trying." That was the moment I snapped. All the pent-up frustration, the years of feeling invisible, the countless sacrifices I'd made, all of it boiled over. "Forgive her, Mom. I can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Stop making excuses for her. This isn't about forgiveness. It's about accountability. Until she learns to face the consequences of her actions, nothing will change." My words hung in the air, sharp and final. Even through the phone, I could hear the shock in her voice. "How can you say that?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "She's your family." "No," I interrupted coldly. "She stopped being my family the moment she chose to lie and manipulate instead of taking responsibility. And you stopped being my parents the moment you picked her side over mine every single time." The line went dead shortly after. I stared at my phone, my chest heaving with a mix of anger and relief. It was done. There was no going back now. In the days that followed, the calls and texts slowed to a trickle, then stopped altogether. My parents must have realized I meant what I said. Meanwhile, I focused on building a new life for myself, one where I wasn't constantly sacrificing my well-being for others. I rented a small studio apartment near campus, threw myself into my studies, and took on extra shifts at work. Life wasn't easy, but for the first time, it felt honest. I wasn't living under the shadow of someone else's dysfunction anymore. Looking back, leaving wasn't just an act of self-preservation, it was a declaration of independence. I refused to let their toxicity define me any longer. Cara and my parents may never change, but that was no longer my burden to carry. As painful as it was to sever those ties, I knew deep down that it was the right decision. Sometimes, walking away isn't abandonment, it's survival.